Happy Monday and welcome back to the Rocketeer Minute Podcast, the show where each and every day, Monday through Friday, we go over 1 minute of the greatest adventure film Walt Disney's ever made, the 1991 Joe Johnston-directed feature, The Rocketeer. I am one of your hosts, Jim O'Kane of TVDads.com.
And I'm Hal Bryan, vintage aircraft enthusiast, senior editor at the Experimental Aircraft Association in Oshkosh, Wisconsin. And tonight, Jim, we're looking at minute number 6, Careful What You Wish For.
That's right, yeah, and this is, we're still in that high-speed chase with this beautifully crafted Dodge and Fords that are chasing each other up and down over hill and dale on the road from, as we're finding out here in this minute, the road from Encino. So they're somewhere off the 101 and cruising through the valley just beyond the hills of Hollywood.
And, you know, Jim, it occurs to me that the title of this minute, Careful What You Wish For, could be a nice tagline for our entire podcast, for anybody who was looking forward to this.
Yeah, this is you're going to be sitting through every single loving minute of this movie. But
absolutely, but this is a labor of love, 100%.
And we're still in that very high energy this opening scene that goes on for about 10 minutes. I mean, we're thrown right into the middle of the action. We're watching the FBI agents Fitz and Wooly chasing after the bad guy. Well, we don't know why they're being chased, but
right, no spoilers.
They do have they do seem to be having machine guns, and they are shooting back at police cars and FBI, so we can assume they're the bad guys. Good old Lenny in the back of that rumble seat far ahead, while Wilmer is piloting the getaway car.
Right.
We have some pretty good action there. I mean, it's a nice scene where they, suddenly appear these gigantic slugs. Four holes appear in the FBI car, which I know it's a show car, and I know it's just built there, but it's so sad seeing a beautiful antique car getting smashed like that. Oh,
I know. It just hurts. It's a gorgeous cars. And then, like you said, the squibs going off, the slugs popping in. You want to remind yourself, okay, they didn't just go and shoot up a real, what at the time was a 55-year-old car?
Yeah, no, just gorgeous. And that great effect scene where Wilmer's looking through the rearview mirror, and then a big hunk of the rearview mirror disappears as a bullet creases through it and knocks a hole in his windshield. That's just a great little effect from ILM. They're at second 14. Quite an action-packed little moment. And I keep wondering if that's just it has to be a series of mats and composite films, but just that one little 2-second thing. That's the level of detail that Joe Johnston got into. I mean, he learned his craft at helming the second unit direction of Empire Strikes Back, and it just really shows all the idea of how you can make a movie without making it look too much like special effects, at least for this part, because we haven't gotten into the super special effects later on.
Right. Well, and it's funny. We'll be talking about Joe Johnston, I'm sure, every single episode. It's almost impossible to avoid. But there's hardly a minute in this movie that doesn't feel like a love letter to the era.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
He's so good at capturing that detail and getting the cars right and getting the airplanes right. And all these little nuances, the Beeman's gum we've talked about on the tail or the rudder of the GB, all that good stuff. It's just so rich.
Yeah. And we had been saying that this seems to be the first minute where there's nobody new. We've seen a lot of a lot of introductions going on here, but the new introduction for this particular minute is the arrival of the authorized personnel only mysterious case. Which beautifully and carefully lettered. I mean, this is in the age before decals were a thing. So someone had, back in the 30s, someone would have had to have carefully, stenciled that. The classic scene that you'd see of someone holding a little stick while carefully applying gold leaf.
Right.
And that seems to be, whoever made the thing that's in that box must have had a lot of money to do that. So we'll talk about that more later.
I'm sure we'll figure that out.
Yeah. So we watch Wilmer and Lenny spill over the side of the dirt road there into the bean field.
Right.
And they start heading out, and with Wooly and Fitz close behind.
Right. And with Lenny in that rumble seat in the back of that car, he's just getting an amazing ride. But boy, either you and I are probably just young enough that maybe our parents had cars with rumble seats. I don't know if you ever ridden in one. I haven't, but boy, that just looks like a kick.
I've sat in a rumble seat. It just wasn't moving. It was at a car show, so I can claim at least that portion of it.
You've had a singular stationary rumble.
That's right. Yes, it did. Excellent. It wasn't rumbling when I was sitting in it. Let me put it that way. But just a beautiful scene. I love the morning light catching both cars as they're traveling diagonally across the bean field.
Right.
And then we see good old Cliff comes right over the rise in that steep dive in a GB. I mean, which must have been incredible to just the feel of keeping all these low level passes must have been quite a thing to do.
Oh, no kidding. As coming in, beating up the cars, he comes right over the trees. And it's really the shot that I love is we see him come over the trees. Then we see the pilot's eye view. So we're looking back at Cliff. Then we see the pilot's eye view, and we're looking ahead across the cockpit, or just over what would normally be the glare shield of the airplane.
Yeah.
And he's got the gauge there right in front of him, and he's got it placed right on the car. And he's using that gauge just to sight and line up the pass. I don't know if this is Steve Hinton or Craig Hosking flying at this point. But one of those two guys is doing it. The way he's lined up the angle of the airplane to make sure he goes right over the top of the cars, and then we see the wider shot, and looking up, seeing the bullets flying, all that kind of stuff. It's just beautifully constructed.
Yeah, I just can't imagine how many passes they must have done to get that right. I mean, that one
right.
shot after we get the POV, the pilot's POV,
right,
and there's the chase plane, which is probably a helicopter, I would think, as the plane's flying underneath them. Just quite a shot. And just having to wait for things like the dust to settle and all that. And you can see that it wasn't the first take, as there's tire tracks in front of them.
Oh, sure. Yeah, they've done this more than once.
Yeah. I forgot to ask, what the gauge that you were looking at on the hood of the GB is that just an RPM gauge, or what is it measuring, would you think?
Can you give me one sec? Let me zoom in on here just a little bit. It is it's either fuel quantity or fuel pressure.
Oh, okay.
And that's a little bit. It's a little bit odd. I'd have to be honest, I'd have to go back and look at the original airplane, and I will do that.
Okay.
Or will have done it, and see if that's correct for there, or if that's just there for dramatic effect, so that we have something in our field of view, that shows losing fuel, losing power, or what have you.
Yeah.
And as I'm looking at the shot again, I'm not entirely convinced that that's even from the GB. If that could just be
some kind of like
a construct in front of the
yeah.
Just because I'm looking at how good the view is. First I'm complimenting them on because if you were going to come buzz those cars, that's exactly what you do as a pilot. Where you'd pick a frame of reference in the front of the airplane and sort of plant it squarely on the car and fly right in. But it's the visibility forward in that airplane is so terrible that that might just be a construct built around a helicopter with a camera behind it.
Okay, yeah.
And so we're hoping at some point to connect with Steve Hinton, if not Craig Hosking as well, who've flown in this, and that's going to be a big question for them, is what they can tell us about how they got that shot, because I'm on the fence, to be honest.
Okay, yeah, I have to find out what that is, but it's just a fascinating shot, and so many tight cuts here to give you the lay of the land. I mean, we go from the overhead shot of seeing the plane making the pass, then we see Lenny in the back raising his Tommy gun.
Right.
Back to the POV inside the plane, and he's just shooting at the plane as it passes overhead. And then we cut to the close-up of the engine cowling with bullet holes appearing in it. It's very. I mean, you could see how this was probably storyboarded extremely carefully,
right?
Just to get the exact shots that they needed.
Yeah, and that angle where we see Lenny shooting up, and we're underneath him. And, right on the fender of the car as the airplane goes over, and you see, you're watching the shell casings pop out of the Tommy gun. That's just. Yeah.
I mean, and that was probably shot static with, he was just sitting in a parked car shooting
right,
while somebody was rocking the car, but still, it's just a fantastic clip to move along with, what they call the Kuleshov effect, where you see things happening, and if you see them in sequence, your brain kind of stitches them all together and say, oh, he's shooting at this thing, and you're seeing the cowling getting struck.
Although it is interesting, because it always looked to me like he was shooting in the wrong direction.
Yeah, yeah, it looks like he's
Like,
way, way wide of it.
yeah, he's sort of rotating to his left, and it looks like, well, if he rotated to his right, he'd be pointed right at the airplane.
Yeah, but it's a movie.
But hey,
and it works.
I'm not here to pick on this movie. I love
Yeah.
every blasted second of this movie.
Oh yeah. Well, and now we get to our first. The first one I've noticed, the first gaffe of the movie is where we cut back to Cliff grabbing onto the stick, and the stick
right.
has suddenly changed color. So I think this is actually the yellow GB, and I think the earlier one when we first saw them take off, as we talked about in an earlier episode, the red top on the control stick was probably, I think, was from the other model, which is the Model R. I think that was the model. The one that we're going to see at the very end of the movie.
Right, and so that one was a non-flyable mock-up, but yeah, this yellow one, yellow one obviously very flyable, and interesting that there was a little jump like that, and then that same sort of thing, that next, right in line with that control stick, a couple of things here. If you lose engine power in an airplane like this, it doesn't suddenly start to sort of fly erratically. And the whole concept, especially an airplane as twitchy and sensitive as a GB, once he gets both hands on the stick and he's yanking it back and forth, you kind of wince because with just any one of those control movements, he would have been rolled over and been upside down, and the beam field of the movie would have ended here at minute 5.5.
Yeah,
but
I'd give him a break and say, well, maybe it hit some of the control cables, and he's just trying to figure out which ones of the control cables are no longer active.
That's fair. But boy, those big movements and both hands and everything else. But hey, I believe, as somebody once said a moment or two ago, it is a movie, and it is trying to tell a story, and it's doing a beautiful job of it.
Yeah, we'll just rack it up to playing the steering or something.
Right, exactly.
Great shot with the going between the trees, and they're very the close up, which when you have a close up in a film, it limits the information. So you're just seeing, all you're doing is you're focused on the plane, and you're watching those big plumes of gasoline smoke coming out of the back, and all that that almost cartoon like sound of engine failure. That just every movie loves that same sound. So this
exactly. It's funny, we all know about the Wilhelm scream.
Yeah.
In a lot of aviation movies, anywhere from the maybe late 30s, very early 40s on up, sort of indefinitely, almost any time you see an airplane diving, like in particular if it's going to crash, you hear this roaring, wailing sound, and that's a siren from a Stuka dive bomber, the German dive bombers. It's really the only airplane that ever made that sound when it was diving, and it was purely a psychological thing. And we're not hearing it here in this minute, and I don't believe that Johnston ever used it, as I recall, but we'll see if I'm wrong in later minutes.
Cool.
But anyway, almost every aviation movie you'll hear this noise, and it means the airplane's crashing, and we're all attuned that that's what it means, except it's just a Hollywood sound effect.
Every pilot is trained on the checklist of crashing that they have to turn on that noise.
Right. Yes, turn on the crashing siren. That's step number one. You mentioned that shot looking between the trees. As you say, we go from a couple of close-ups, then we've got it tearing along. It's trailing that thick white smoke, which they get just by it's a form of mineral oil. You eject straight into the hot exhaust of the airplane, and it just turns on the smoke. That's what airshow pilots use. Wonderful sense of motion and movement. And, as somebody who's not a filmmaker in any way, shape, or form, you'd be tempted to say, well, we need to move because these trees are going to be in our way. But it's perfect. That shot would be nowhere near as good without the trees passing by in the foreground and giving us that relatable sense of motion.
Yeah, it's very much a subjective. We're not omniscient, so we are kind of like trying to follow what's going on with poor Cliff, and we're trying to watch him through the trees. So it heightens our interest in the center of motion there, which is the GB. So
exactly.
Then we're back down on the ground there, driving through some what look like to me they look like shagbark oak. I may be wrong. I don't know. I don't know California trees that well, but it's a nice. You don't typically see a lot of chases on dirt roads in movies. I don't recall many. I mean, maybe back in the day, Bonnie and Clyde. I can think of a couple of dirt road ones, but that was topical for the time. It's very contemporary, so it's nice seeing these big old giant pieces of metal flying through dirt roads, trying to get out of the way, and that that cutting back and forth between the turmoil on the ground and the turmoil in the air. I find it interesting that when we cut back to the GB, everything is coated with oil except for the canopy. So it's kind of
right. And that first shot, it's all everywhere we see from the outside. There's some streaks all over the place. They've been painted on. But yeah, exactly. Then we look back and there's the cockpit and there's Cliff with his goggles, but no oil yet.
No, but it's just it'll be coming for continuity purposes. We're going to start seeing more oil. That must have been something in that scene that they had shot in, with him in the back of the plane, the Waco going with, I guess somebody was standing in front throwing oil on top of it, or they had
they had a big squirt bottle or something, yeah, a pump of some kind. It's actually. Except for the minor sort of the continuity hiccups, we probably should have seen more of it on there sooner. But it's actually pretty convincing. I've never had a catastrophic failure or anything like that where I was leaking that much oil, but I've certainly talked to pilots who have. And if the engine's in the right place, and those radial engines, like on that GBZ, they're measuring oil burn per hour like in the half-gallon range.
Wow!
So there's lots and lots of oil in these airplanes. So absolutely, if your Tommy gun hits it in the wrong spot and you start spraying oil, you're going to get a ton of it all over that airplane.
Now, I am not a radial engine expert, but aren't I thought the radials are mostly air cooled, so I'm not sure how much that would affect temperature, as if you were losing oil.
Sure. So yeah, in this case, the radial is air cooled, but certainly, of course, the oil itself is providing some cooling, but most of it is just the fact that all of the cylinders are exposed in the front of that cowling, so it's just the wind coming straight on through the prop, and of course the blast from the prop itself that provides that cooling.
While we're watching, as the minute's finishing up, we're watching them driving through the trees at the edge of the bean field, and we're getting more of the byplay between Woolley and Fitz. You get the feeling. I do like the way that they do seem to have a rapport. I mean, this is going on. Fitz is talking about how it's the third car that they've gone through with Hoover in a month.
Right.
So, which is why they have a 1938. They're driving a 1938 Ford, because apparently the 37 and 36 ones are probably long gone in the mud.
Exactly. Well, and it's a nice little bit of extra reinforcement that if it wasn't clear, these are FBI agents, and just we throw in a reference to Hoover. I always wondered about Woolley comes back with the heck with Hoover,
Yeah.
And 30 years later, Hoover would probably have been listening.
Yeah.
Wouldn't have been happy about that comment.
I think Woolley would have been.
Technology wasn't there.
And this was we haven't talked about this before, but Hoover was really big from the early 30s into the 40s, dealing with saboteurs that really wasn't well known at the time, that they were dealing with a lot of German infiltration, and it would come out later in the early 40s. There were U-boats pulling up in Long Island and in Florida, and offloading American-born but German ancestry saboteurs that were trained in explosives and different things like that, and basic surveillance and stuff.
But it makes you wonder if any of those people ended up in Hollywood.
Yeah.
As an actor, perhaps.
Well, we'll find out about that later. And
we'll talk about that later in later minutes.
Goes.
But it is pretty amazing, and as I understand what you're talking about there, that work with the saboteurs and things, I believe, and I could be mistaken, but Hoover was instrumental in creating the FBI. He started as the director of the Bureau of Investigation in like 1924 or 25, something like that, and then created the FBI in 35, so about 3 years before this picture takes place. And I think that seems early to be worrying about specifically about some European saboteurs, but that he was looking for that stuff.
Yeah,
and,
he was very involved in racketeering, and after Prohibition went away about 6 years before this, or not even that, 4 years before this, he had been getting more involved in racketeering and organized crime, and I think that's where he started getting into more stuff where the international aspects of it. I mean, not just from Europe, but from Canada, Mexico, and things like that. He was looking at infiltration and counter attacks against. He was in supposedly an investigative bureau, but he was more like an anti-racketeer. He was actually a police force that would work on all these other things. So it's this is kind of, it's not the height of Hoover's influence, but it definitely on the rise. And just having guys, a team of guys like this that would be tracking down saboteurs like the folks in front of him, even though the guys in front of him, as we'll find out later, are not German saboteurs. They're just, mostly hired muscle.
Right.
But
when I feel sorry for the LAPD in this segment too, as they they're involved in this great chase, but they don't really get to do very much.
Yeah, a little bit. They're a little bit out of their league in all the stuff going on here.
Right.
Even though these guys are just local crooks mostly.
Yeah.
But a lot of missed shots. We see Wilmer get his hat blown off and stuff like that. But
right. So shots that are really close.
Yeah.
A few careers ago, I was in law enforcement for several years. I was a small town cop in a little city in Washington, and it was interesting. We did a lot of practice qualifying with various weapons and things like that. And trying to shoot from a car is a lot harder than it looks. And even a stationary car with a moving target, much less two moving cars. So I'm looking at this and saying, boy, that shot where you shot his head off, that was just blind luck. That was not a warning shot or anything else.
That's up there with Brownian motion. It's like eventually you're gonna, I guess you miss 100% of the shots you don't take. So that could be climbing. And we're just finishing up the minute we're back to the cliff's eye view, or not the cliff's eye view, but the propeller's eye view of Cliff. And unfortunately for Blu-ray, you can kind of see exactly where the cutout is going to happen for that
right.
Obstructed. Oil makes a great outline when it hits the cuts on a piece of plexiglass.
Yeah, it does. It does give us a hint of what's about to happen. I think right in the next minute, if I remember correctly.
Yeah. Well, we'll check back on that for Tuesday, and it's a good thing that Cliff has his goggles on because he's going to need them very shortly. But let's pick this up tomorrow and talk a bit more on as we're watching Cliff with his now wounded GB and see where the intersection of criminality, well, more than just the bullets that are hitting, the intersection of crime and aeronautics comes up tomorrow. But thanks for joining us here on our Monday show, and please stay with us the rest of the week. If you want to pick up the conversation here, we've got a multitude of places. You can go to Twitter, find us at Rocketeer Minute. You can find us on Facebook at the Bulldog Cafe, where we get together and talk about the Rocketeers Bulldog Cafe. All these episodes, things to come, and all things 1938. And, of course, at the great big website, rocketeerminute.com, where we have links to places you can buy on Amazon. You can get a copy. And if you haven't seen this movie, we're really early in this thing, so come on. And it's only 109 minutes long. You can sit down and watch it in a little bit more, over an hour and a half. You'll get the whole drift of this film. It's a great Disney film, and you'll understand what we're talking about when we're going through all these things. So check back with us here tomorrow, and we'll see what's going to happen with Cliffy and his poor plane. Now, you've probably noticed that the sound bed music hasn't been coming up underneath my voice as we're doing this stuff, but Hal and I decided to let you hear a little bit more of it. Tom Geyer, who was on our episode 3, and talked a lot about the music of James Horner, wrote us a very nice exit music, and I keep feeling bad every day we talk that we're drowning out his great music. He did this beautiful version of the James Horner To the Rescue score in 6/8 time, and it's real peppy, and it's just amazing, and just really shows off his skill set. So why don't I just let Tom play us out here, and you can enjoy his music for the next 56 seconds. So until next time, over and out.